Imagine walking out of your front door on a Tuesday morning, heading to the market, and seeing your neighbor in the middle of the street. She isn't just standing there, she is dancing. Not a slow, graceful waltz or a happy little jig, but a violent, frantic, and desperate movement. Now, imagine she doesn't stop. She dances through the afternoon, through the night, and into the next morning until her shoes are soaked in blood and her muscles are screaming. Then, one by one, other people start joining her. Within a month, hundreds of people are trapped in a literal dance of death that they cannot quit, even as their hearts begin to fail. This isn't a horror movie plot. It actually happened in the summer of 1518 in the city of Strasbourg. In the year 1518, Strasbourg was a busy city in the Holy Roman Empire, which is part of modern-day France. Life was hard, but people were used to the grind of daily labor. However, in mid-July, something broke in the social fabric of the city. It all started with a woman named Frau Trophia. One day, for no apparent reason, she stepped out into a narrow cobblestone street and began to dance. There was no band playing. There was no festival happening. There wasn't even a catchy tune being hummed. She was just moving. At first, people probably just watched with a mix of confusion and amusement. Maybe they thought she'd had a bit too much wine, or she was celebrating some secret good news. But as the hours turned into a full day, and then 2 days, the amusement turned into genuine horror. Frau Trophia wasn't smiling. She looked like she was in a trance. Her face was twisted with exhaustion, her clothes were drenched in sweat, and her feet were getting shredded by the rough stones of the street. She would occasionally collapse from sheer tiredness, only to twitch and kick until she forced herself back up to continue the rhythmic thrashing. This went on for 6 straight days and nights. Can you imagine the sheer physical toll of that? Most of us feel exhausted after a 20-minute jog. She was performing high-intensity cardio for over 140 hours without a real break for food or sleep. By the end of the week, the local authorities were getting worried, but they had no idea that this was just the beginning of a massive public health crisis that would go down in history. What happened next is what truly elevates this from a weird individual breakdown to a terrifying historical event. By the end of that first week, Frau Trophia wasn't alone anymore. What happened next is what truly elevates this from a weird individual breakdown to a terrifying historical event. By the end of that first week, Frau Trophia wasn't alone anymore. 34 other people had joined her in the streets. They weren't dancing with her in a social sense. They were just near her, caught in the same inexplicable urge to move. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't laughing. They were just stomping and leaping in a grim, silent marathon. By the time a month had passed, the number of dancers had exploded to around 400 people. Think about that for a second. 400 people, mostly from the poor and marginalized parts of the city, were clogging the streets, unable to stop their own bodies from moving. This wasn't a localized vibe. It was a full-blown epidemic. The logistics alone were a nightmare. The streets were filled with the sound of panting, the dragging of feet, and the occasional scream of pain. The physical toll was absolutely gruesome. These weren't athletes. These were peasants, weavers, and mothers who were already malnourished. Their feet were literally falling apart. Chroniclers of the time recorded that the dancers' shoes would wear through, and they would continue dancing on raw, bleeding flesh. Because the body isn't designed to handle this kind of constant strain, people started dying. On the worst days of the plague, it's estimated that up to 15 people were dying every single day. They died from massive heart attacks, strokes, and simple, brutal exhaustion. They quite literally danced themselves to death. As the bodies started piling up, the City Council of Strasbourg knew they had to do something. They called in the best minds they had, the local physicians. Now, back in 1518, medicine was a bit of a guessing game, but these doctors actually tried to be scientific for the time. They ruled out the usual explanations, like angry stars or the devil. Instead, they came up with a theory called hot blood. According to the medical knowledge of the time, the body was governed by 4 humors, or fluids. The doctors decided that these people had overheated blood in their brains. This heat was causing a sort of frenzy in the nerves, forcing the limbs to move. It sounds ridiculous now, but it was their version of a neurological diagnosis. However, their cure was where things went from bad to worse. Instead of telling people to rest, tie them down, or give them a sedative, the doctors told the city council that the victims needed to dance it out. They believed that if the dancers could just finish their session and burn off all that hot blood, the plague would end. The city authorities took this advice literally. They actually built a massive wooden stage in the middle of the city and cleared out grain markets to provide more dancing floor space. They even went a step further and hired professional drummers and pipers. They thought that providing a beat would help the dancers move more efficiently and get the sickness out of their systems faster. Can you imagine the scene? A city filled with dying, hallucinating people, and the government is providing a live band and a stage to make sure they keep going? It was like a medieval rave, where the only exit was the grave. While the doctors were looking at biology, the average person on the street was looking at the heavens. In the 16th century, religion wasn't just a weekend activity. It was the lens through which everyone saw the world. A specific name started being whispered: Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was a Christian martyr who, according to legend, could cast down a curse of dancing mania on those who angered him or failed to show him proper devotion. For the people of Strasbourg, this explanation made a lot more sense than hot blood. They believed they were being punished for their sins, and that Frau Trophia had triggered a divine wrath. This created a massive spiritual crisis. The mood in the city shifted from confusion to pure terror. People weren't just afraid of dying, they were afraid of why they were dying. The local church began organizing mass prayers and even started rounding up the dancers to take them on a forced pilgrimage. Imagine these poor, exhausted people, barely able to stand, being loaded into wagons and hauled up into the Vosges mountains to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus. Once they got there, the priests would put small lead crosses in their hands and red shoes on their feet and lead them through rituals to beg for forgiveness. It was a desperate attempt to use faith to solve a problem that medicine had only made worse. For centuries, people have asked the obvious question: why? What could possibly make hundreds of people lose control of their bodies like that? One of the most popular modern theories is ergotism. Ergot is a type of fungus that grows on damp rye. This fungus contains alkaloids that are chemically related to LSD. When humans eat bread made from trippy rye, they can experience ergotism. The symptoms are intense: hallucinations, a burning sensation in the limbs, and violent convulsions. At first glance, this seems like the aha moment. Maybe the whole city just had a really bad trip because of some moldy bread? But when you dig deeper, the theory starts to fall apart. While ergot does cause twitching and spasms, it doesn't cause coordinated rhythmic movement that lasts for weeks. Also, ergotism usually restricts blood flow, leading to gangrene. The historical records don't mention gangrene. They mention people leaping and dancing with incredible stamina. So, most modern experts think we have to look elsewhere. If it wasn't a fungus and it wasn't a curse, what was it? Many historians believe the answer lies in the human mind: mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria. To understand why this would happen in 1918, you have to look at how miserable life was. The city had been hit by devastating crop failures, leading to massive famine. At the same time, new and terrifying diseases like syphilis and smallpox were sweeping through. The people of Strasbourg were under an incredible, soul-crushing amount of stress. When humans are pushed to the brink of psychological endurance, the mind can snap in strange ways. Mass psychogenic illness often takes a form that is culturally relevant. Because the people already believed in the curse of St. Vitus, their brains essentially chose that specific outlet for their breakdown. Once Frau Trophia started, it became a psychological contagion. People who were on the edge saw her, and their brain slipped into a dissociative trance state. In this state, the body can ignore pain and exhaustion far beyond its normal limits. It wasn't that they wanted to dance, it was that their subconscious minds had taken over as a way to cope with a reality that was too painful to bear. The idea of a trance state explains how these people were able to keep going until their hearts literally burst. Your brain isn't processing the stop signals from your muscles. It's a bit like how a person under hypnosis can be told they are aboard and stay rigid between two chairs, a feat they could never do while conscious. It was a physical manifestation of a psychological breaking point. The hot blood theory and the decision to provide music actually made it worse because it validated the behavior. By building a stage and hiring musicians, the city authorities were telling the victims' brains, yes, this is what you are supposed to be doing right now.